Purina believes no one should have to make the impossible choice between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Through the Purple Leash Project, Purina is helping create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit purina.com/purple to learn more.
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today's a special episode. I'm going to be talking with author Madelaine Drohan, author of a new book that kind of ties together a bunch of things that we were talking about this season. Her book is called He Did Not Conquer, Benjamin Franklin's Failure to Annex Canada. The things that this book brings together are some of the things we've talked about in special episodes this year about Canadian history, about which I've been learning or reminding myself of some facts I didn't know before, but also Canada's colonial past. But this also connects with Benjamin Franklin and the American Revolution. And Benjamin Franklin also went to Paris and he interacted with Marie Antoinette. So everything we've been talking about this season ties up so nicely in this book. And also in this conversation, we talk about how when Madelaine started researching this, is kind of a niche project. And then suddenly in this past year, there's been more conversations in the year 2025 about the possibility that some Americans might want to annex Canada. And so just a history of people trying and failing to do that. It's such an interesting book. It's just come out. So again, the book is called He Did Not Conquer, Benjamin Franklin's Failure to Annex Canada. And Madelaine Drohan, just so you know, the author who you're about to hear me talking to, she's a senior fellow at the Graduate School for Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. She also spent most of her journalistic career as a foreign correspondent, reporting on Europe for the Toronto-based Globe and Mail, and then on Canada for the London-based Economist. So she's coming at this book from an academic point of view and also from a journalistic point of view. It makes it incredibly readable. Anyway, enjoy this conversation with author Madelaine Drohan. So I'm joined today by Madelaine Drohan, author of He Did Not Conquer, Benjamin Franklin's Failure to Annex Canada. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on, Anne.
I think it's a very bold title, and it really explains what you're talking about. Can you explain the premise of your book, please?
Well, the premise is that Benjamin Franklin had designs on Canada for decades during his life and made numerous attempts, some of them intellectual and on paper and political, and some actually involving him personally, to annex Canada, to make it part of what were then the American colonies.
Can you tell me what your reaction was when your book became suddenly very... The news events, I think when you started making this book would have been like, oh, this is an interesting story from long ago. And then how did you feel when suddenly it became so pertinent to what's happening now between Canada and the US?
Well, you're right. When I first started the research, this was definitely a niche topic. I mean, people were interested because it involved Benjamin Franklin, who's got good name recognition. But other than that, it was sort of, oh, interesting. And then Donald Trump started talking about the 51st state. And all of a sudden, it became incredibly relevant. So, of course, I was happy, but the book by that point had already been researched and almost completely written. I signed off of it in January, and Donald Trump was just getting started.
When I first came across the information about the book being published, I thought, wow, what a timely book. But of course, you didn't just write it.
No, in fact, it's the product of about 5 years of research and writing, and I had the idea even before that. So it's been sort of percolating in my mind for a while.
And so can you explain, and this is in the foreword of the book, how you first got the idea for this book, how you first learned that Benjamin Franklin had this interest in Canada?
Well, the topic of the book, I stumbled on this completely accidentally. I was in Montreal. I was writing for The Economist at that time as their Canada correspondent, and I was on assignment, but I had some time to kill. So I wandered into a museum that was close to my hotel called the Chateau Ramezay, which is this lovely building that dates from the early 1700s. And I'm wandering around in there, and all of a sudden on the back wall, I see this big portrait of Benjamin Franklin. I thought it was odd that he would be in there because this is basically about Quebec history, the museum. But there was a little plaque right beside it that said something to the effect that Benjamin Franklin was in this very building in 1776 when Montreal was occupied by American troops. And that raised two big questions in my mind right away, which basically led to the book, is what was Benjamin Franklin doing in Montreal? And why was Montreal occupied by American troops? Now, this isn't something I learned in school. I don't know about you or your listeners.
Nope.
No.
Can you explain, and you do in the book, there's maps, there's numerous maps, and you explain very well what territory exactly Benjamin Franklin was intent on annexing.
I love old maps, which is why I had some put in the book in a more modern form. But one of the things you learn from looking at old maps is there weren't actually agreed upon borders for places like Canada or even the colonies. Whoever drew the map, drew on local intelligence and decided where Canada was and where the colonies were and where they ended. So there was a lot of disagreement about that. But in terms of what Benjamin Franklin wanted, in some ways it's very simple. He wanted it all. Because at the time, he and other British American colonists, I'll call them that, thought that really they should have the whole continent, that there shouldn't be a separate sort of political entity above them. So, yeah, he wanted it all.
And so I read a copy of your book, and it seems like there's kind of three main attempts that Benjamin Franklin took. Is that correct?
Well, it depends how you want to parse them. I actually noted about 14 times that he tried.
Okay.
but some of them were more serious than others because the early attempts were what I'd call sort of intellectual exercises. He was a writer and a publisher, so he had a big audience for his writing in the colonies and increasingly in Europe later on. So I dated his earliest sort of suggestion that the Americans should be all over the continent was something he wrote in 1751. Where it was talking about population increase, and he was just projecting that the American population would explode and they would basically settle the entire continent. So that was pushing the idea. I don't know if you can say it wasn't an actual attempt. Later on, when he moved to London to be an agent for some of the colonies, and he made very strong arguments there, trying to influence the British government after the 7 Years' War. And that's the war where the British basically pushed the French out of Canada. But in the negotiations to end that war, there was always sort of a lot of horse trading in negotiations. Okay, you captured this, but give that back to us and we'll take this. And so there was a debate in London about whether Britain should keep Canada or Guadeloupe. Now, if you look at it these days, you think that's not really much of a choice. But at the time, Guadeloupe was very attractive. It produced a lot of sugar. It made a lot of money for whichever imperial power owned it. And so Franklin, he wrote a lot about this, actually. But he wrote a big pamphlet called the Canada Pamphlet, where he made this very strong argument that Britain should keep Canada and join it to the American colonies. So there is another attempt to make it all one. But he also wrote sort of satirical newspaper articles and that. I mean, it was a real campaign on his part during that period.
It was really, I just wanted to point out, and this comes across so strongly in your book, he never stopped thinking about this. This was just a real, I don't want to say obsession necessarily, but certainly an interest of his for decades.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I don't want to overstate it because at times other things took priority for him, but he never lost sight of this idea. And he kept it going. So we'll get to the second attempt that I think you're thinking about. And that's the one that's sort of immortalized in the Shadow Ramesay, in that in 1776, he actually came to Canada. Now, the American colonists had invaded in 1775, actually 250 years ago today. They were starting to invade Canada. And that invasion went on. They captured Montreal, they captured Trois-Rivières, and all that was left for them to conquer, what was then known as Canada, was Quebec City. And they got stopped there and laid siege to the city, were not able to capture it. And around about that time, the Continental Congress decided we need to salvage this invasion, and they sent Benjamin Franklin with two other delegates up to Montreal. They were supposed to turn the whole thing around and basically conquer Canada. They failed.
I want to ask Benjamin Franklin himself. I don't know a lot about American history, but to me, he's much more known for his writing than for being any sort of military man of action. Why did they send him?
A number of reasons, but let me just talk to your first point, because it is true that that's how we know Benjamin Franklin, through his writings and his scientific experiments. You know, that image of him with the kite and the key, that's probably stuck in most people's minds. But actually, he was quite active earlier on in doing things like forming a militia in Pennsylvania, which is his home colony. He was actually a leader of a militia unit. He went out and sort of supervised building forts. This was when the contest was between the British American colonists and the French and French Canadians up in Canada. So he had a taste of military life. He wasn't completely someone who just sat at his desk. And he was also involved during that period in trying to buy weapons for the Americans. And he was always thinking of ways of constructing, defenses and where the best place would be to place cannons. So he did have this side of him. It's just not the side that's being immortalized for people.
Okay, so we're getting into the why there's this commemoration that you saw in Quebec. So the actual invasion, can you explain how that all came to be?
Well, the invasion took place when the American colonies had joined together to form what they called the Continental Congress. And just in the name itself, you can see the ambition, right, of what they actually wanted to represent. The relations with Britain were becoming very strained. And one of the things that the Congress wanted to do was sort of give Britain a bit of a poke in the eye by attacking the British forces that were in Canada. Because by this point, and we're talking about 1775, Canada was a British colony that they called the province of Quebec, or Canada.
And now for a quick advertising break. Fall is here, and with it comes cooler nights, heartier meals, and the craving for something warm and satisfying. That's where HelloFresh comes in, bringing you comforting, chef-designed recipes and fresh seasonal ingredients right to your door. This season, they've taken things to the next level with their biggest menu refresh yet. Say hello to a whole new way to do dinner. That's right. HelloFresh has doubled its menu. You can choose from 100 options each week, including new seasonal dishes and recipes from around the world. You can even dig into bigger portions that'll keep everyone satisfied. And I just want to let you know, in my box this week, because I do in fact use HelloFresh, they have Halloween themed things, and one of them is a meal that's like stuffed red peppers, but you can carve little jack-o'-lantern faces on the peppers. How cute is that? You know, I like a little whimsy with my food, and you're going to get that with that meal. And also, if you're not whimsical, other kinds of meals too. The best way to cook just got better. Go to hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm now to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. One box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm to get 10 free meals and a free item for life.
If you've shopped online, it's extremely likely that you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes the process from, I think I'm ready to buy, to, I can't wait till it gets here, so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. It gives you a leg up from the very beginning, with hundreds of beautiful, ready-to-go templates to express your brand style, so you don't have to spend time coding a website. Shopify allows you to tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. Plus, they have built-in marketing and email tools to help find and keep new customers, so you can easily spread your brand's word. And did I mention that iconic purple Shop Pay button that's used by millions of businesses around the world? It's the reason why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. Your customers already know it, love it, and actually use it. If you want to see less carts being abandoned, it's time for you to head over to Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. Shopify.com/realm.
Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
And we're back.
So the Congress, keep in mind that there were, a number of people there that thought the continent should be theirs anyhow. But they had got intelligence from various people, spies in Canada and sympathizers in Canada, that, of course, the French Canadians would welcome them with open arms. All they had to do was walk in and Canada would be theirs. And this was bad intelligence. I mean, they were listening to, people that confirmed their biases, because the French Canadians, who made up something like 99% of the population at that point, there were very few English Canadians, they were sort of sympathetic, some of them, to the American views, but mostly I think a lot of them just wanted a quiet life. Britain had just passed legislation that allowed them to keep their Catholic religion and to keep their laws and to allow the clergy and the seniors to keep their systems and collecting money from the peasants. So there wasn't a lot of unhappiness in Canada at the time, but this didn't seem to get through to the Congress, and so they approved an invasion of Canada. gave it to George Washington, commander-in-chief, was supposed to make it happen. And he picked, he decided on sort of a two-prong approach where he had one general lead troops up Lake Champlain to Montreal. That's what they were supposed to capture. And he had another general, Benedict Arnold, who later deserted from the American cause, but he led another group up the Kennebec River and through the wilderness, basically to Quebec City. So it was going to be this pincer movement where they would claim all the major population centers in Canada, and then Canada would be theirs.
We know that didn't happen. So how did what went wrong? Sounds like such a good plan.
Oh, everything went wrong, really. I mean, I mentioned the bad intelligence, right? But there was also the fact that the Continental Army wasn't really unified. Each of the colonies was supposed to give men and equipment, and they didn't necessarily all give their best men or enough equipment. I mean, they had other things on their mind. They were trying to fight off the British in Boston and in New York. So Canada, in that way, was sort of adding a bit too much burden to the army. When they got to Canada, one of the biggest problems is they didn't have enough money. So they get to Canada and they need to buy provisions to feed the army. And at first it was great. The French Canadians would sell them, cattle and things like that for hard currency. And then they ran out of hard currency and they tried to get the French Canadians to accept this paper money, the Continental paper money, and they just said no. And the Continental Army started seizing what they wanted. So all of a sudden, this sort of neutral to supportive French Canadians turned hostile against them. There's so many reasons why it went wrong, but one of the last things is that they weren't clothed properly for the Canadian winter. The invasion started at the beginning of September. It ended up with these American troops camped outside the walls of Quebec City in December, poorly clothed. I mean, and also they didn't have enough food, so they also came down with smallpox. There was a great conspiracy theory that went among them that the British governor, who was in Quebec City, had intentionally sent an infected prostitute out so that they could make as many Americans sick as possible. I don't think that's true, but I don't know that it's not true, but it sounded like a conspiracy theory to me. But so all of these things just piled up, and the invasion was really faltering. Benjamin Franklin gets to Montreal, sort of takes one look at what's going on, and realizes that he can't turn this thing around. And he arrived there April 29th. He left on May 11th. And he was sort of joining this, the troops were running for home at the same time because some British ships had appeared in the St. Lawrence. So they knew it was all over. They ran for home and tried to forget about this invasion of Canada.
That's what I was going to say, and kind of never really talked about it.
No, even it's funny because in those days, people wrote letters all the time. They'd dash off 4 or 5 or 6 letters in an evening. That's how they communicated. And I noticed that there's this very strange gap in Benjamin Franklin's personal letters that basically starts when he gets to Montreal and ends when he leaves it, and he picks up his personal correspondence then. Now, maybe he was too busy. I don't know. But he was busier in other times and still managed to write letters. So I think it was something that they decided that the least said about it, the better.
Because this is also, during the American Revolution, it was so important to them to present themselves as a strong capable group of people. They didn't want word to spread that they had failed in such a major way, I would imagine.
I think that that's true. That's certainly one reason to be quiet. It was the very beginning of the revolution, and they didn't want it to affect morale.
But, that this happened midway through your book. Benjamin Franklin did not give up hope that this could happen somehow. What was one of the other ways that he tried after that to try and make this happen?
Well, this, I think, was probably his most serious attempt, was when he was in Paris. Now, he was sent to Paris after the failed invasion in Canada. He came back, and very quickly afterwards, I think it was the summer of 1776, they decided to send him to France. Now, the reason that he was going to France was to try to get support from the French for the revolution. So he wanted money, men, weapons, and they thought the Continental Congress decided he'd be the best person to send over there. He went with a couple of others, but he was the lead. And then he stayed on and became the chief negotiator when it looked like a peace settlement was possible with Britain. So he was the one that started the negotiations with Britain over the peace that would end the American Revolution. Now, he wrote out a list early on in those negotiations of something like 8 items that he thought would have to be included in those negotiations. Some he called necessary, some he called advisable. And among the advisable was Britain should give Canada to the United States, right? So, and he kept that up for a while. In fact, the British negotiator said something in his notes about these negotiations about Dr. Franklin brought up Canada as he is wont to do on these occasions. And he kept it up right almost to the very end of the negotiations. He fell ill just before they were concluded, and his fellow negotiators had other priorities. Canada wasn't their priority as much as it was Franklin. So in the end, they dropped it because what they really wanted more was the land to the east, to the west of the Appalachian Mountains, to the Mississippi River. They really wanted that. That used to be part of Canada, New France. So they decided they wanted secure access to that. And also they wanted secure access to the fisheries off of the east coast of Canada. So those were sort of the two big ones that shouldered out of the way the idea that they would actually get all of Canada as it was at that time.
And I mentioned to you earlier, I've been doing a series of episodes about the French Revolution and about Marie Antoinette. And I was excited to read the part of your book about Benjamin Franklin in Paris and his fashion, because I've spoken a lot in my other episodes about there's so much happening. His hat. What can you tell us about his famous hat?
Yes. That was a fur hat, and you can still see a few portraits and medallions of Franklin wearing it. He got it on his trip to Canada. No one knows exactly where he got it, but he got it just basically to keep his head warm. And on the voyage over to France, he wore it again to keep his head warm. He's going bald and that. But when he saw that actually the French were paying attention to it, he decided to wear it all the time. And this became sort of his trademark, along with his sort of sober way of dressing. I mean, you'll know from all of your work on Marie Antoinette, this was a time where men and women really, dressed up, and it was colorful and lacy and over the top. And Franklin, who really had, like a PR guy's perspective on these things, on his image, decided he would dress very soberly in sober colors and wear his fur hat. And he basically set off this sort of, fashion revolution for a while in Paris, most notably, where people would style their hair and call it a la Franklin. I haven't seen any pictures of what that looks like, but somehow it must look like a fur hat. And his image was everywhere. People would have an engraving on their mantelpiece. They had it on mugs and on clocks. And he really took the fashion side, the culture side of Paris by storm when he arrived. And that worked perfectly for him because he wanted to build up his image so that he had a stronger position for these negotiations going forward.
I think that it was just so interesting to be reading, especially that part of your book, as I've been doing this research, and to know, I think it was very canny of him to realize, like, oh, the hats, the fashion is so important here. And people are just hungry for a new trend, to be able to use that to make himself stand out. And the people there were trying to stand out by having the most ostentatious clothes. And he just, like you said, a PR sort of way of thinking, well, what if I wear the least ostentatious clothes?
Yeah.
And then I'll stand out in this other way.
Well, yeah, and it also backed up another image he was trying to create of America being this egalitarian society where no matter how far you rose in life, the distinctions weren't as big between people, between classes as they were in Europe. And that went over very well with, the philosophers over in France who were big supporters of him. So, with everything he did, he always had a reason. With everything he wrote, there was something else going on in the background that he wanted to get across. And that particular one about Americans being, egalitarian and all for personal liberty, and that met with, a good reception in France, because although their revolution was still a little bit in the future, there were already stirrings about that, about personal liberty and freedom, and, freedom from having, an overbearing government. So it worked for him.
I'm just wondering if you have, so this episode is going to come out just the same week that your book is available. So everybody should go buy a copy of this book, obviously. But do you have any final thoughts you wanted to say just about what it means to you to have this book coming out after so many years?
Oh, well, it's personally fulfilling, and I'm going to have a huge celebration on September 30th, inviting all my friends in Ottawa. But also, I'm also happy about the timing, which is completely fortuitous, because it puts what Donald Trump is doing into a broader context. It makes it more understandable, I think, for people that this is not something he just came up with out of the blue. It has been part of American thought, not all Americans, but it has been a strand of American thought, for several centuries. And so when we think about how to counter that, we have to take that history into account.
I love that the weather was one of the reasons why the invasion didn't work. It just feels like such a Canadian thing that, you didn't bring a good winter jacket.
It's true. Maybe they do better this time, although I'm hoping it won't come to that.
Yeah, well, just not in winter, I guess. But thank you so much for joining me. It was such a delight to talk to you. Your book is just so the listeners know, it's readable. You're filling in some interesting gaps in parts of history people may know, like the American Revolution, the French Revolution, but you kind of hold people's hands to explain, well, here's what was happening in between, to fill in these blanks of a time period people might have thought they knew. It's a great book, and so congratulations for all the work you put into it and to finally have it out in the world.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me on the program. It was a great conversation.
So again, Madeleine's book is now available. It is called He Did Not Conquer, Benjamin Franklin's Failure to Annex Canada. Available wherever you get your books from. And I really recommend reading it. It's such an interesting way to connect so many parts of history that I often think about as very separate: Canadian history, the American Revolution, French history. It's so interesting. And as she mentioned, lots of very interesting maps if you're a map fan, like she is. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Vulgar History. We're going to be back on Wednesday when we're beginning a whole new series. Well, it's sort of a mini series for the month of October. We're going to be doing Halloween-based episodes as we enter into Mary Shelley month, learning more about the people and events in the life of the infamous author of the book Frankenstein. Anyway, until next time, my friends, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Anne Foster. That's me. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans, and for everyone else at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod, and get in touch with me via email at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
There are vampires out there. They walk among you, shoulder to shoulder, in the dark. Heading to work, heading home, going to the bar. It's a life just like anyone else's, and I have grown used to it. To the darkness, to the moon, to the taste of blood on my tongue. But vampires are dying out. We are a fading kind, and I am the first one created in so long. And that is a dangerous thing to be. Those who came before me, elders of all stripes, they do not want to see our kind gone, and they will do anything to keep their power. And for myself, and for Grace, who created me, that is a sword that hangs above our heads. And the worst person of all carries our secret, and he will use it however he sees fit. Who do you look to when things are at their darkest? From the creators of Parkdale Haunt comes Woodbine, a podcast about monsters, dreams, and changes, those you want and those you never saw coming. Season 2 arrives September 24th, distributed by Realm.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Tom.
Okay, so you want to tell him, or you want me to tell him?
No. I got this. People out there.
Yeah.
People, lean in. Get close. Listen, here's the deal.
We got big news.
We got monumental news. We got snacktacular news.
Yeah, after a brief hiatus, my good friend Michael Ian Black and I are coming back.
My good friend Tom Cavanaugh and I are coming back to do what we do best.
What we were put on this earth to do.
To pick a snack.
To eat a snack.
And to rate a snack.
Scientifically.
Emotionally.
Spiritually.
Mates is back.
Mike and Tom Eat Snacks is back.
A podcast for anyone with a mouth.
With a mouth. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
From the darkest corners of our imagination comes a game show that's more ridiculous than terrifying. Welcome to Tickled to Death, the horror comedy game show where nothing is sacred, everything's a little unhinged, and the only thing more cursed than the questions are the jokes. I'm Roz Hernandez, your fearless host, and each week I'll be leading a brave group of guests through twisted horror trivia, improv games, and enough sarcastic banter to make you question all your life's choices. So come for the screams, stay for the snark. Listen to Tickled to Death wherever you get your podcasts, and hit follow unless you want the show to follow you. In the meantime, don't get tickled to death.